It was impossible not to laugh when you saw Stan Laurel. His charm as part of the famous comedy team Laurel and Hardy is still felt today. Behind those laughs, though, was a hard life that most of his friends didn't know about. Stan's life was not easy. He had to deal with painful personal losses and problems at work. Death taking his son was one of the worst things that could have happened to him. Before we talk about the sadness and loss, let's remember the good times in Stan Laurel's life. He made millions of people laugh. And we should get a full picture of the man behind the comedy. As time went on, Arthur Stanley Jefferson became known as Stan Laurel. He was born on June 16, 1890, in Ulverston, Lancaster, at his grandparents' house. Arthur J. Jefferson was a traveling actor and theater manager, and Margaret Jefferson was an actress. They were both too busy acting to raise a child while they were on the road. Stan grew up in Ulverston with his grandparents, George and Sarah Metaff. He got to know the town pretty well during that time. Stan didn't just hang out and play with his toys. He was taking in the sights and sounds of going to Holy Trinity Church with his grandparents. He also seemed to be getting really hungry for Beer's Trickle Toffee from Gillam's General Store. Stan's love of theater began at the Hippodrome Theater, which was right across the street from where his grandparents lived. His parents put on shows in a theater with a wooden frame and a canvas roof. There, his dad would write some of the plays that made him famous. Stan did more than just play in the streets as he grew up. As he watched shows, he became more familiar with the magic of the theater. The Hippodrome burned down in 1910, which was sad. But Stan left for America that same year. We'll talk about that in a movie. Stan lived with his grandmother Sarah Metaff in North Shields for a while, before going to King James I Grammar School and the King's School. In the end, Stan's family packed up and went to Glasgow, where his dad ran the Metropole Theatre. This is where Stan really got the stage bug. When he was 16, he jumped right into theater. His first paid performance was at the Panopticon in Glasgow. He may have also realized at this point that getting paid to make people laugh was a great deal. Stan joined Fred Karno's group when he was 20 years old, in 1910, going by the stage name Stan Jefferson. Here things got really interesting because the other person in the troupe wasn't just any person. The person was Charlie Chaplin. Yes, the two future stars were touring and doing goofy comedy. They were probably trying to be funnier than each other. Stan was even given the chance to help the Chaplin. They both took the same ship to the US, and the rest is really funny history. Stan signed up for the military while the world was at war. He got away with it though because he was deaf and a resident foreigner. He wasn't going to let anything stop him from becoming a great comedian though. Stan didn't do nothing when the Karno troupe broke up in the spring of 1914. He didn't wait for the next big thing. He joined forces with Edgar Hurley and his wife Ethel, who were also former Karno performers, to make the three comics. They changed their name to the Keystone Trio after being told to by their booking agent. This was a reference to the popular humor show Keystone Cops at the time. At this point, Stan began to play around with his character by imitating his old friend Charlie Chaplin. At the same time, the Hurleys started to play the parts of Chester Conklin and Mabel Normand, two silent movie stars. From February to October 1915, they went on a great tour. But after that, the trio broke up, and Stan went on to new adventures. Stan Jefferson formed the Stan Jefferson Group with Alice Cook and Baldwin Cook from 1916 to 1918. The two of them worked together offstage too. Baldwin and Alice would become friends for life. But in 1921, Stan met Oliver Hardy, who was also a very important person. They worked together for a short time on the silent movie The Lucky Dog, but they weren't yet the famous couple we all love. Stan also met actor May Dolberg around this time. She told him that his stage name, Stan Jefferson, was bad luck because it had 13 letters. Because he was afraid of bad luck, Stan changed his stage name to Laurel and started over. Soon, Laurel was offered $75 a week to be the lead in 2 real plays, and he jumped at the chance. Universal gave him a deal after he made his first movie Nuts in May, but as you know, that contract didn't last long. It wasn't made because the studio had to reorganize, but Stan didn't let that stop him. He and May were in a number of pictures together, including the parody from 1922. There was a movie called Mud and Sand that was just plain silly. Stan had fully committed to the movie business by 1924, when he signed a deal with Joe Rock to play in 12 reel comedies. This contract had a strange clause tied to it. It was against the rules for May Dolberg to be in any of these projects. Joe Rock thought that Stan was being held back by her mood. When May started getting in the way of Stan's work in 1925, Rock offered her money and a one-way ticket back to Australia, where she was born. May said yes, and that was the end of their relationship. Stan's work, on the other hand, was just beginning. Stan made a number of comedies between 1924 and 1925, such as Mandarin Mix-Up and Detained. He had also directed or co-directed 10 silent shorts by 1925, though he didn't act in any of them. Hardy, who would become his comedy partner, did however appear in 3 of these pictures. Yes, 3 people: Nanette, Wandering Papa, and Madam Mystery. Laurel's work was going in the right direction. Even though they weren't quite a powerhouse pair yet, he and Hardy were on their way to becoming one of the best comedy teams of all time. He took the next big step in his career when he signed with Hal Roach Studios. He had big plans to write and direct it first, and in 1925 he even directed a movie called Yes, Nanette. Oliver Hardy, who would become his comedy partner, played a part in that movie under the stage name Babe Hardy. But things didn't go as planned. Hardy got hurt in the kitchen and had to go to the hospital that same year. He was in the Hal Roach Studios comedy All-Stars. Since Hardy couldn't work on the movie Get 'Em Young, Stan was asked to fill in. This is where things changed. When Stan and Oliver shared the screen together, magic began to happen. By the beginning of 1927, Laurel and Hardy were a common pair on TV and films. They were in a number of short films, such as With Love and Hisses, Duck Soup, and Slipping Wives. The two seemed to get along great, and it didn't take long for the people at Roach Studios to notice how the crowd responded to their antics. Director Leo McCarey saw their promise and started putting them together more often. Later that year, the famous Laurel and Hardy series was born. The team quickly became one of the most popular silent film humor groups, making good short films like The Battle of the Century, Should Married Men Go Home, Two Tears, Be Big and Big Business. Even when they switched to talkies in 1929, they didn't slow down because they had such a natural flow. Their first sound movie, Unaccustomed as We Are, was a big hit. Later that same year, they were in their first full-length movie as part of the review scene in the 1929 Hollywood Review. The next year, they were in The Rogue Song, an all-color Technicolor musical. Laurel and Hardy reached another important milestone in 1931, when they starred in their first full-length movie, Pardon Us. They kept going strong and made both full-length and short films, until 1935. Their short film The Music Box won an Academy Award for Best Short Subject in 1932. It felt like the best thing in the world to them, but things can't always be perfect, as anyone who has ever hit a high note knows. Stan Laurel and Hal Roach had some rough times in the 1930s. They fought over the terms of their contract, which caused a big fight. Roach had separate deals with Laurel and Hardy, and each one ended at a different time. In other words, Hardy's deal wasn't up when Laurel's was. Because of this, Roach kept Hardy at the studio and put him in films with comics like Harry Langdon in 1939. There was even talk of making a new show called The Hardy Family, with Hardy and Patty Kelly. This didn't go over well with Laurel, so he sued Roach over the contract. The legal fight ended in the end, and Laurel went back to working at Roach Studios, but their relationship was never the same. Soon enough, both Laurel and Hardy would decide it was time to break up with Roach for good. In 1941, Laurel and Hardy made a deal with 20th Century Fox to make 10 films over the next 5 years. Laurel was shocked to learn that they were only hired as players. They don't have any say in how the films are written, acted, or edited. They weren't allowed to be as artistic as they were at Roach, but the movies did well, and as their fame grew, Laurel and Hardy were able to do more fun things. As time went on, they slowly added their own work to the pictures, making them more personal. In the history of show business, they would become one of the most famous pairs. When their star was shining brighter than ever, though, bad luck struck in 1957. On August 7, 1957, Oliver Hardy died. He took with him half of one of the most famous comic pairs ever. He felt like he had been hit in the gut by the news. He had lost his best friend, the person who helped him be creative, and the only person who really got the strange, amazing rhythm they had together. In a sad, quiet moment, he said, "Babe would understand. He was too sick to go to the funeral. There was a strong link between them, so you would know that was likely true." But when Hardy died, it wasn't just the end of a work relationship, it was the last movie Laurel ever did. Even though he was offered roles on stage and in films, he turned them all down. He didn't want to work without Hardy because he was proud or stubborn, he just didn't want to. She felt like the act wasn't the same without Babe, and to be honest, nothing ever really was again. Even though that loss was very painful, it wasn't the only bad thing Laurel had to deal with. His private life was full of broken hearts, drama, and too much chaos. The world saw a funny man. They didn't see how hard it was for him when the cameras stopped rolling. Place a dot. Stan Laurel was known for his slapstick comedy and famous bowler hat, but his personal life was more often like a sad tragedy than a comedy. People laughed at Laurel's pranks on TV, but behind the scenes, he was quietly dealing with heartbreak, scandal, and deep personal sadness. Among them was the terrible death of his baby son. Her past relationships sound like they belong on a soap show. Early on, he was seeing May Dahlberg. They never got married, but from 1919 to 1925, they lived together legally as husband and wife. Dahlberg was very important to his early career. She even came up with the name Stan Laurel for herself. But when director Joe Rock thought Dahlberg was holding Laurel back professionally, he bought her a plane ticket back to Australia the only way she could go. She left. Things didn't end there though. After more than 10 years, in 1937, Dahlberg came back to the US and sued Laurel for money. At the same time that he was going through a tough breakup with his second wife, the lawsuit made things even worse. And even though it was settled out of court, the public show was just one more bitter note in a personal symphony that was already very messy. But it wasn't as bad as what happened in May 1930. The second child for Laurel and his first wife Lois Nielsen is a boy named Stanley Robert Laurel. He showed up 2 months early. Even though the pair had hope, Stanley died just 9 days after he was born. For a man whose whole job was to make other people happy and laugh, this loss was a deep and personal pain. Laurel never talked about it in public, but it must have left a deep scar. That pain could not be dulled by jokes or cheers. Laurel's love life kept getting more confusing as she got married and remarried many times. His first wife, Lois, died in 1934, and he married Virginia Ruth Rogers in 1935. That quickly fell apart. He told her he still cared about her, but she didn't want to get back together with him. After that there was Ilana Shuvlova, a union that ended in a storm with claims that Laurel tried to hide her alive in the backyard. In 1940 that marriage fell apart. After that, Laurel married Virginia Ruth Rogers again, maybe just for fun, but they split up again in 1946. He married Ida Kiteva Raphael that same year, and she would be by his side until the end. Stan Laurel always had a smile on his face when he was on TV, even when he was having a bad accident or a private tragedy. Behind that smile, though, was a man who had been through a lot of pain. He lost a child, loved ones many times, and finally his best creative partner. His life was sad and black and white, just like the movies that made him famous. Place a dot. Stan Laurel quietly stepped away from the spotlight after the end of the famous Laurel and Hardy partnership. He did not leave his fans' hearts or the respect of his peers though. It was no longer his job to act, but his legacy kept growing. Even though he lived a simple life, Laurel made a huge impact on comedy, and in 1961, the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences gave him an honorary Oscar for his creative leadership in the field of cinema humor. Even though Laurel was too weak to go to the ceremony, his impact was clear. Danny Kaye received the award for Bob Hope, who had given it, a touching act that showed how much Laurel was still loved and admired in the entertainment business. Even though Laurel was in almost 190 films, he didn't spend his last years in a fancy Hollywood house. Instead, he lived in a small simple flat in the Oceana Apartments in Santa Monica. He wasn't spoilt by his fame. In fact, Laurel kept his phone number in the public listing, and often picked up calls from fans himself. He was proud to answer fan mail, and he never lost the humble attitude that made so many people love him. If you call him, he might answer and talk to you like you're an old friend. Comedians who wanted to be like him often went to him for advice. Jerry Lewis not only went to see him, but he also used Laurel's impact in The Bellboy by giving the main character the name Stanley, and giving Bill Richmond a role as a character based on Laurel. As a young artist, Dick Van Dyke went through the same thing. Van Jake got Laurel's phone number, called him, and was asked to come over. After that, Van Jake honored him by playing him in an episode of The Dick Van Jake Show. It wasn't just acts of admiration that they knew Laurel's comedic spirit went on in their work. Stanley Kramer, the director, offered Laurel an appearance in It's a Mad, Mad, Mad World with Buster Keaton, the Three Stooges, and other great comedians. Laurel turned it down. He was adamant that he would not be on film without Hardy. It was said that he didn't want to be seen old. He was always loyal to his late partner. Even so, there was going to be a small nod, a background shot of a double wearing Laurel's signature bowler hat and sitting in an old roadster. But even that short salute was changed in the end, and Jack Benny got the cameo. In the final cut, he wore Laurel's hat. Stan Laurel may have left the camera in the end, but he never really left the stage. Laurel will always be remembered in the world of laughter for the comics he helped shape, the fans he made happy, and the classic films he made. Being quiet and kind, and still looking for the perfect joke right up until the end. When it came to the end, Stan Laurel spent his last years in peace, away from the attention that used to follow him everywhere. His health was getting worse by the middle of the 1960s. A lot of tests were done on him in January 1965, and they found an illness on the roof of his mouth. After that, he had a heart attack in February. After a few days, on the 23rd, he died gently in his armchair. He was 74 years old. There was no big show or dramatic finish. It was just a quiet goodbye from a man who used to make everyone laugh without saying a word. He was laid to rest at the Los Angeles Church of the Hills. It wasn't a huge Hollywood show, but it was full of good-hearted people who really liked him. The speech was given by Dick Van Jake, who had become close to Laurel in his later years. Van Jake always thought of him as more than just a funny hero. He looked up to him as a friend and teacher. Buster Keaton was also there to honor someone he thought was in a class by themselves. In Hollywood Hills, Stan was buried at Forest Lawn. Even though he wasn't there, his impact was felt everywhere. It wasn't just the fame or the 190 titles. It was the heritage he left with Hardy, the laughter they shared, and the method they used to make every other comedy pair possible.